Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode here at the Damage Report, the second day of the best week of our lives, everybody. Isn't it a great time to be alive? We do have one good thing going for us, though, and that is that today we've been lucky enough to snag the one, the only, the Emma Vigeland. Emma, how's it going?
It's going well. I had some peanuts before I came on air because I was very hungry, and rumor has it you're really hungry too, John.
I am incredibly hungry. I was thinking about Chinese food. I understand it's really early in the morning, but that sounds good to me. And I think in 2020, just do whatever you want.
Right.
The Senate Republicans are gonna. Why shouldn't we? So
yeah, literally everything that possibly can go wrong is currently going wrong. Even things I love, can't have them. Can't have sports. Can't have
fantasy football.
Can't have Saquon Barkley, whatever, tearing his ACL. Can't have the Supreme Court justice that I love still living. All those things sucks. Everything sucks. But let's have a great show.
We probably won't have that either because everything sucks. But yeah, and I was telling you before that they canceled The Dark Crystal. It's like, what is up with Netflix, man? It's like, that was amazing. God. And I'm sure it's because not enough people watched it.
Other shows. They have a million other shows. What's one more?
I don't care. I want that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I blame everyone who didn't watch it. I blame you in the audience right now for not watching that. And now I don't have any puppets. We can't have puppets. You know how nice it would be to have puppets right now, considering everything that's going on? So I guess at some point, I will stop talking about puppets and transition to talking about the things that are going on. But before I do that, for those of you who are currently watching perhaps live on Twitch or wherever, YouTube, feel free to hit the like button, share the stream, let people know that we're live because we've got a big show. We also have a big special, a Get Out the Vote special that we're going to be doing later on today, I believe starting at 4:30 Pacific time. Hold on. Yes, watch Tuesdays, 7:30 p.m. Pacific time, 4:30 p.m. Eastern time on tyt.com/live, YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, Roku, and other platforms that don't yet exist but will be announced and come out before that time. Myself and Cenk Uygur, Ida Rodriguez, Benjamin Dixon are going to be debunking myths around voting, giving you information about your rights as a voter, walking you through some of the deadlines and things you need to know to make sure that you vote, because I don't know if you know this, voting's important. Perhaps now more than ever. So we're going to be talking about that. Definitely tune in later for that one. Emma, you going to be voting? What do you think about voting? You think it's important?
I might get around to it. I'm not sure. But maybe I'll learn some insightful information about what voting even is. Can you give me the dictionary definition of voting? How do you spell it? VAUHTING?
Is that a boys joke?
No, anyway, I spelled it kind of Vince Vaughn-esque, and it just came to me.
Oh, yes. Don't listen to Vince Vaughn for any information about voting. That would be a bad idea.
Don't.
I'm just going to guess. It would be a bad idea.
I think he's a libertarian. Like, I think he's a lone Hollywood conservative, but doesn't mean he's not a very compelling actor.
Yes, in some things.
I like him.
I like him too, but... You know what? Okay, fine. We'll put him in the Dark Crystal, then we can bring him back. Get that star power that we need. Anyway, okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about some news. We're also going to be responding to your tweets and comments and all of that. So feel free to send those flooding in. I could use them. Emma probably can use them too. She's mostly human, and we need the support. So anyway, with that, why don't we talk some of the big news of the morning. There were two Republicans on record saying no new Supreme Court justice should be pushed through before the election, Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins. And there was a third possibility, Mitt Romney. Isn't he reasonable these days? Hasn't he occasionally gone against Trump? And so we're just waiting to find out. Oh, no. He says, I intend to follow the Constitution and precedent in considering the president's nominee. If the nominee reaches the Senate floor, I intend to vote based upon their qualifications. Oh, so... he's just the same as all the rest. That was fun, thinking that maybe he would do something different. It wouldn't even be enough, by the way. Even if he had gone against it with Murkowski and Collins, it wouldn't be enough. But what do you know? Mitt Romney is going to do what Republicans are going to do, Emma.
Yeah, but he marched in a Black Lives Matter rally, so we should give him kudos. I don't know. I mean, I shouldn't be so sarcastic about it. That was important and interesting, and like a good step forward for the Republican Party in its own respect. But this is just another stark reminder. Mitt Romney came out in the primary and talked about how Donald Trump can't be the nominee. He's horrible. He's bigoted. He's racist. He's cruel. All of these things. And then, what do you know? He goes simping for Trump and shows up. And there's
how long have you been waiting? Anyway,
I've just been using the word simping a lot recently, and I kind of love it.
Did you actually know that Ted Cruz's beard style is the simp? That's actually what that's called.
Well, it should be called that because that's exactly what he is. But yeah, we all knew that Mitt Romney wanted that, I think it was Secretary of State position at the time. And he came and he bent the knee and he said, Trump, my dear leader, I will follow you to the ends of the earth, even though I said these horrible things about you and ostensibly care about morals and all of that. So that isn't going to be the case now.
Yeah, look, and he has gone against him sometimes during impeachment or whatever, which totally ended up mattering. I mean, that's why all this damage has stopped being done to the country. But no, on this, it's too important. It's too important. You know why? Because it doesn't matter what they've said in the past or the supposed principles or standards they expressed in the past. They want it. They want as many. They want 9 conservative justices. They want 50 conservative justices if they can have it. And so they're going to have it. Doesn't matter. And nothing matters in comparison to that because of how long it will last. Whoever they end up ramming through on there is going to be on the court for 30 to 45 years. They're not going to, like, on Twitter, it was trending again that Lindsey Graham had, like, spoken in the opposite way a few years ago. Yeah, good. We pointed out. Of course, you should point it out, and then you should move on because it doesn't matter. It's a cautionary tale, and it should be a cautionary tale that leads to a lesson for Democrats, but as you're going to see in a little bit, it's probably not going to. But anyway, I want to play you one bit of what Mitt Romney said this morning about the battle over the court. Take a look at this.
So I recognize that we may have a court which has more of a conservative bent than it's had over the last few decades. But my liberal friends have, over many decades, gotten very used to the idea of having a liberal court. And that's not written in the stars. And I know that a lot of people are saying, gosh, we don't want that change. I understand the energy associated with that perspective. But it's also appropriate for a nation which is, if you will, center-right, to have a court which reflects center-right points of view.
Okay, so I left in that last little bit that a lot of people have been cutting off because, first of all, Emma, it's just a center-right country, according to our politicians and our media, and it doesn't matter what happens or what changes or what policies they support. It is always going to be a center-right country, whatever that needs to mean. It can mean anything they want, but it definitely isn't to the left. No matter what, on any topic, it's center-right.
It's infuriating. Just because Congress is center-right and because what is left of the Democratic Party and its leftism is center-right doesn't mean the country is on that playing field. You just ask anybody, what do they think about legalization of marijuana? Oh, 2/3 of the country supports it. And yet the official Democratic position now that Kamala Harris is putting out there and Chuck Schumer is just decriminalization. So they're center-right. The country isn't. Medicare for all, a Green New Deal, all of these social issues. The country is certainly to the left, but as long as you repeat it over and over again, it must be true. And also the idea that the court has been liberal for the past years. Mm-hmm. Do we remember Bush v. Gore? Do we remember? That was as obvious of an indicator about the court's political leanings as anything. And they quite clearly made their decision to stop the Florida recount and hand the presidency to George W. Bush. And it's been that way since then, a conservative court. It really has. Save for some specific social issues, the court has always sided with corporations against workers fairly consistently for the past few decades. So it's just a ridiculous claim.
Yeah, no, it's a liberal Citizens United decision, a liberal shredding of the Voting Rights Act, all of that. No, and this is the exact same thing as saying this is a center-right country. It is redefining what every single word means. If you believe that the court was liberal over the past 30 years, that's insanity, but they have to pitch it. He's not going to go as far as every other Republican will say that they're crazy Marxist or whatever, like, Sotomayor is an insane communist or something, but he is still pushing in that direction. That's what the intent of this is. And to the extent that the country has had sort of whatever kind of expectation that the court should be in that direction over the last few decades, perhaps it has something to do with the fact that, as we've pointed out on these issues, that's where America is. America doesn't want abortion to be outlawed, but that's what they're going to get with this new Supreme Court justice. And maybe, you know, like an amazing stat that a lot of people have pointed out, during the entire life of Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the Republican Party has won the popular vote in a presidential election one time during a war that we know cows people into supporting the status quo. Maybe that has something to do with their expectations for the Supreme Court, that the Republicans who can't win nationally and haven't been able to for freaking decades maybe shouldn't have a super majority on the Supreme Court. Maybe there's a bit of a gap there, okay? And it's not just in terms of language. But anyway, that's Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney's going to do what Mitt Romney's going to do, because at the end of the day, while he might not like Donald Trump, he's a conservative Republican, and he wants conservative Republicans to have as much political power as they possibly can. Now, we're supposed to fight back against all of this, you know, their moves on the Supreme Court with our Democratic leadership. And so let's take a look at what this Democratic leadership is. So here's a little bit of Chuck Schumer.
Why even bother constructing a pretense for your position? Why say it's this rule or that rule and then do the exact opposite when it suits your interests? Why not just come to the floor and say, I'm going to do what's ever best for my political party? Consistency be damned, reason be damned, democracy be damned. Just admit it. There's no shaping the cravenness of this position. If a Senate majority over the course of 6 years steals 2 Supreme Court seats using completely contradictory rationales, how could we expect to trust the other side again? How can we trust each other if, when push comes to shove, when the stakes are the highest, the other side will double-cross their own standards when it's politically advantageous?
Okay, so there's 2 sections of that video. We're going to eventually get to both of them. But the second one right there was, if they steal 2 Supreme Court seats, how could we trust them in the future? Why are you talking about the future? Why do you trust them now? Why apparently did you trust them yesterday and last week and the month before that? Why, after all of this, would Chuck Schumer, the leader of the Democrats in the Senate, why would he doesn't know what year it is. He doesn't know what decade it is. He's still sort of waking up a little bit about the state of the Republican Party and how power equals power and all of that, Emma.
Yeah, it's insane. It started off pretty good, right? Talking about the cravenness of the position. But then he started to say, how could we ever trust you again? You trusted them before? You trusted them before. The Republican Party. You trusted them before with a guy like Ted Cruz on the other side of the aisle. That's the people who literally play dirty whenever they get the chance. Mitch McConnell banks on Democrats caving and having a little bit of humanity for all of his negotiations with them every time. And he'll hold people's livelihoods and lives and their health care and their immigration status and things that affect people, millions. They'll hold that over Democrats' heads in order to get more tax cuts for the rich, corporations, bailouts, etc. He does that every single time. Why would you think it would be different this time around? They play hardball every single time. And yeah, as you pointed out, John, he's talking about the future. In Roll Call reported a statement to other Democratic leaders and members of the caucus. He said he was talking about next year. Oh, we'll do everything in our power next year to hold them to this and go after them and retaliate, and then nothing will be off the table next year. Why are you already seeding that they'll be able to do this? You have a number of procedural things that you could actually do, but they don't want to go down that road. They never, ever want to use the tactics that Republicans repeatedly use against them.
And that he, as you pointed out, he starts by saying, he goes through all of those. That's why I left it in, because if you are going to be spurred by the way the Republican Party has evolved over time into doing what's necessary to defeat them, then good. I want to hear all of that. What he said right there is, you know, sort of a weak, tired, sleepy version of what we said on the show yesterday. But if you're not going to do anything, then screw you for uttering even one of those syllables, because now you're just wasting my time. So now you apparently do acknowledge that they have no standards. They don't care about lying, decency, the norms, blah, blah, every single one of those things. And so how can we trust them? I'm going to be really mad in 2021. No, there's no point in you learning the lesson if that's what you take away from having learned that lesson, Chuck Schumer. And maybe he'll do something. Maybe if we push him hard enough, he'll do something, expanding the core, statehood, whatever, maybe. But he's only going to do that if we push him a hell of a lot harder than we are now. And I would say whether he does it or not, he needs to get out of that spot, because he's taken up a spot in the Senate, and he's certainly taken up a big spot in Senate leadership that he has never deserved, ever, and certainly doesn't now, considering what we're facing. AOC should take him down if there's any chance of her taking him down. The issue is, as Emma pointed out, they're already looking forward to someday something's going to happen. And it's not just him. Nancy Pelosi tweeted this: Republicans are rushing to get someone on the Supreme Court because they want to obliterate the Affordable Care Act. Mark my words, they will pay for elections to come. No, I don't care about them paying in the future. If they're going to pay in the future, they're going to pay in the future for having done it. What you're saying is effectively, it's the herd immunity thing. It's, we're not going to do anything, and we're just going to see what happens. We're just going to see what happens. No, what are you going to do? We had the leader of the Dems in the Senate, the leader of the Dems in the House, and both of them appear to be saying, someday, if they do this, then surely people will get mad and they will vote for Democrats, because that's been the solution to all of our problems. There's not any sort of structural impediments or obstacles to the popular vote actually being translated into political power in a million different ways. And yet the two most powerful Dems in DC still believe that that will save us, or they believe that that will placate us and get us to just go along with this.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, they only care about accumulating power. If you actually cared about the substantive reasons why a conservative Supreme Court would be so horrible, take the ACA, for example. Joe Biden has promised to strengthen the ACA. It's the most measly, ridiculously small promise, but that's what he's said he's going to do on healthcare, right? Mm-hmm. Trump gets his nominee through. That's impossible. That's impossible. They're already going to gut it. It's in the lower courts right now, and it's going to be appealed. So all the small things that they're promising from a policy perspective on the Democratic side, the conservative things they're promising, won't be possible if Trump gets this nominee through. That's just the reality. We want Medicare for all down the line. Well, if the court is completely conservative for decades and decades, that's going to be a massive problem. But when you're not focused on the policy effects and you're only focused on winning electorally and accumulating power, which will eventually shift back to the Republicans and eventually shift to you because Democrats are so bad at making their case, then this is the result you get. You get people like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and their leadership. And additionally, they are in that position not because they're good negotiators and they actually win for their side. They're in that position because they're good fundraisers. It's the same reason that Hakeem Jeffries won his leadership position and took Joe Crowley's old position. He's from a close-by district in New York, and it's a reason that Barbara Lee isn't in leadership, because she doesn't play that game. It's all about who can be the best fundraisers. But that doesn't help when we actually have to negotiate with for policy. In fact, it hurts us because they're so worried about corporate donors. And that's the reality of Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi's leadership.
100%. And like, it would be one thing, maybe, at least in terms of winning elections, if they could translate that fundraising into winning elections. But the best they can come up with is hiring consultants and making ads, and they make the worst possible ads imaginable. Like, teenagers on Twitter produce harder hitting ads than all of the consultants combined. So it is just taking money, handing it out to people that you conveniently know and have worked with for a very long time, so they get enriched, and then just going along. And whether you win elections or whether you lose elections, you basically have like a 90% chance of keeping your seat no matter what, which is a nice position if you can get it, I guess. Unfortunately, the vast majority of Americans don't have those positions, and so we are currently suffering. Let me read you one more quote from Nancy Pelosi, and I want you to take from this whether she gets it or not. On Sunday morning, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi demurred when asked whether a Democratic majority would consider expanding the court as reprisal for a late-term Trump appointment. Quote, "Let's just win the election. Let's hope that the president will see the light." What are you talking about? see the light. He has as good of a chance as that is someone who just had like tire irons jabbed through their eyes. He's not going to see the light. He doesn't care. He's doing what will benefit him, and his base 100% supports it. They'll see the light. She's the leader. She is the leader, and she's basically just saying, well, let's see if he all of a sudden is a fundamentally different person than he's been for 7.5 decades. Let's see, and let's see if he'll stop engaging in behaviors that have benefited him 99 times out of 100 in every situation in his life. Let's see if maybe he'll change for some reason that I can't even define and don't even bother to try.
Fingers crossed, maybe. I mean, that was a horrific appearance on ABC on Sunday. She also had some sort of glitch, beep boop, good morning, Sunday morning. It was embarrassing. Yeah, I mean, I almost feel bad making fun of her because it might have been a senior moment. I don't really know, but yeah, that was tough.
I mean, you could, if you could just get a random elected Democrat into both of those seats, it would have to be better, right?
Yes.
I mean, it can't be much worse. Maybe Manchin. I don't know. Here's one that I probably wouldn't want replacing Chuck Schumer, and that is Dianne Feinstein, who was asked about ending the filibuster or expanding the SCOTUS. Any of these consequences that Democratic leadership are saying, well, I mean, I guess you'll get the seat, but we'll get you on the next one. So all of those, she says, I don't believe in doing that. I think the filibuster serves a purpose. It is not often used. It's often less used now than when I first came. And I think it's part of the Senate that differentiates itself. Okay, so let's bring up a little chart of filibusters. And so she came at that third from the left line. She said it's used less now. It is just assumed that any legislation you don't want is an automatic filibuster, and not even one of those cool old school TCM cinematic filibusters where you have to actually make a spectacle of it. It's just assumed, and then we proceed. Oh, you don't have 60 votes for something to benefit, the poor and working class? No, we're just going to move on. But Dianne Feinstein says that chart, it's the exact opposite of it. Flip that upside down. Come on. It's a great tradition. It's a great norm. I know it's not written down anywhere, but I like it. And I like my norms better than I like political power. That's what she has to say. And now I want to give you an easy take. How easy this is to do. Ed Markey. Mitch McConnell set the precedent. No Supreme Court vacancies filled in an election year. If he violates it when Democrats control the Senate in the next Congress, we must abolish the filibuster and expand the Supreme Court.
That's what you have to do. It's the only option you've got right now. And Feinstein's still like, I don't know, I'm going to play dumb about filibusters. And maybe I was hanging upside down on monkey bars when I first saw the chart and I thought it was the opposite way. That's the only explanation for it, actually. The real explanation is, once again, we're talking about high-profile Democrats who are not high-profile for any reason except for their seniority. I'm not talking about age, but the amount of time that they've been in the Senate, in Congress, in power, and also their fundraising capabilities. That's it. And the difference, there's such a difference between the way right-wingers garner power. Obviously, Mitch McConnell's a big fundraiser as well, but the reason he's still so powerful is because he gets results for their party. What do the high-profile Democrats in the Senate and Nancy Pelosi in the House, what results have they gotten? What? Tell me. Why are they still in power if they can't do anything legislatively? I get it. It's the fundraising. Regular voters don't care about that. Imagine standing for Nancy Pelosi and Dianne Feinstein and Chuck Schumer and people like that. They literally don't achieve anything, and they're just faces for uselessness.
Yeah, I mean, I guess at least Chuck Schumer hasn't been in control. He's still awful in every way, but Nancy Pelosi has had control for 2 years now. What has she done with it? What has she done with it? And I understand you can't necessarily pass any legislation you want if the Republicans control the Senate and all of that. But what have you done?
Impeachment.
What have you done? Remember all those
impeachment, but that doesn't affect any regular person's life ever.
Again, because of the Senate. Yeah.
Exactly, but has she pushed through a substantive legislative priority? What has she prioritized legislatively in the House?
I don't know.
Can't say anything.
In the military budget.
Yep.
Yeah, and You got to love this democracy. You set it up so that there will always be one chamber that, 50 to 75 white people in one state will get the same amount of political representation as, a state with an economy fourth largest in the world, and then make everything contingent on that. So the Supreme Court is based on that, not on the House. If he gets impeached, they can just protect him. Okay, just getting mad.
We need to talk about a relatively new show called the Republic, or UNFTR. As a Young Turks fan, you already know that the government, the media, and corporations are constantly peddling lies that serve the interests of the rich and powerful. But now there's a podcast dedicated to unraveling those lies, debunking the conventional wisdom. In each episode of the Republic, or UNFTR, the host delves into a different historical episode or topic that's generally misunderstood or purposely obfuscated by the so-called powers that be, featuring in-depth research, razor-sharp commentary, and just the right amount of vulgarity. The UNFTR podcast takes a sledgehammer to what you thought you knew about some of the nation's most sacred historical cows. But don't just take my word for it. The New York Times described UNFTR as consistently compelling and educational, aiming to challenge conventional wisdom and upend the historical narratives that were taught in school. For as the great philosopher Yoda once put it, you must unlearn what you have learned. And that's true whether you're in Jedi training or you're uprooting and exposing all the propaganda and disinformation you've been fed over the course of your lifetime. So search for UNFTR in your podcast app today and get ready to get informed, angered, and entertained all at the same time.
Donald Trump has continued his nationwide super spreader tour, getting all of his most devoted servants in rooms so that they can infect each other with a fatal illness, while he regales them with commentary about the pandemic like this.
The disease, we didn't know it. Now we know it. It affects elderly people with heart problems and other problems. If they have other problems, that's what it really affects. That's it. In some states, thousands of people, nobody young, below the age of 18, like nobody. They have a strong immune system. Who knows? You take your hat off to the young because they have a hell of an immune system, but it affects virtually nobody. It's an amazing.
It affects virtually nobody. It affects virtually nobody. Let's take a look at a recent headline, because I expected that if it affects virtually nobody, I would Google and I would see that it killed like 20 people or something like that. But it turns out, no, it's killed more than 200,000 people. Killed a family member of mine. Can't even tell you how many millions of people have had it. I mean, how many millions of people thankfully survived the extended stays in hospitals and now have a lifetime of organ damage to deal with. That's going to be great. And there's apparently some neurological issues that it causes too. That's going to be fun for the rest of a lot of people's lives. But it affects virtually nobody. Virtually nobody. And his crowd cheers. Doesn't matter that he's failed worse on this than any president in our lifetime has failed on any challenge in our lifetime. They will cheer as he mocks the idea that people have been affected by this.
Well, it really just takes a special kind of person in not the right way, in not a good way, to speak about people, 200,000 people who've died, and he knows the figure, but it just doesn't emotionally register with him to speak about people like that in that callous way. He can't understand what it means to lose someone that he cares about in that way, and it be a direct result of public policy. He's grown up incredibly rich and entitled and immune from a lot of the consequences of public policy for his entire life. And so it doesn't register with someone with that kind of a personality disorder, and with someone who is so privileged and cannot see outside their own perspective. It's jarring. And it's jarring to see people who did not have that upbringing respond to it. It's very enraging.
Yeah, it is. And, I tweeted about how it had affected me. And a lot of people responded. There were photos that people tweeted in response. through glass because they had to say goodbye to a loved one who was dying and they couldn't even be near them. A lot of people can't even get in the hospitals. You know what? I'm not even gonna say, but yeah, my family member that died, yeah, his wife couldn't see him for the weeks that he spent in the hospital, and he died. Couldn't see him for weeks. That's how horrendous this pandemic is. Doesn't affect virtually anybody. And he seemed to get that, by the way, with a little Freudian slip in his commentary. He said, if you recall, in some states, thousands of people and no young. Thousands of people what? Thousands of people what and no young? What happened to those thousands of people? We know what you were going to say. Thousands of people died and no young. But it affects virtually nobody, except perhaps those thousands of people. You know, the 10 to 15,000 people in Florida and in California and in Texas, you know, whole communities dead, stadiums packed with corpses. It affects virtually nobody. And the election is still kind of maybe a toss-up. That this guy not only gets to fail, not only leaves, you know, a trail of death in his wake, the domestic likes of which we haven't seen. Obviously, we've had presidents who have gone abroad and killed hundreds of thousands of people. And America generally cares very little about that. But we don't even care when the bodies are piled up here. We're inoculated against caring about any consequence. His base loves him as much, if not more, than they did before the pandemic. Even though they know what he really thinks. He says there yesterday or 2 days ago, it doesn't affect the young. Told Bob Woodward in March, now it's turning out it's not just old people, Bob. But just today and yesterday, some startling facts came out. It's not just older. He said that months ago. But what's the difference? That's inconvenient. Forget it. Set it to the side. It's whatever I want it to be now. Even if Trump told me the exact opposite, it's more convenient. It's more comfortable to pretend that it's only old people. That strategy, by the way, of going out on the campaign trail and saying, this thing I've surrendered to just kills old people, isn't really hurting him in the polls. Fascinating democracy we have. Great society we have here in America.
What do we do when material conditions, mass death, an unemployment crisis, a new depression economically? What do we do when that doesn't register with a massive proportion of our population as connected to the leadership and the political consequences of voting for someone in this country? What do we do? You know, that's why he's leaning into culture war stuff, because he's cynically banking on the fact that the Democrats have refused to make their own case and that policy has not been driven home for people. They can't see the connection between who is leading the country and what's happening to them economically and with COVID-19. I'm not saying that that's a majority of the country, but it could be close to half. And that's what scares me about this election, is that the cynicism, the breakdown of our democracy has been so thorough that people can't see straight anymore. The water has been too muddied. They can't see partly because Democrats don't make their own case, but partly because we've corrupted the entire system. And someone like Trump has muddied the waters effectively enough and blown everything up enough that what do you do when facts don't matter, the differences can't be delineated, and it's too murky for regular people to see? I don't know. I mean,
I guess you do the exact same thing that. No, continue.
Sorry, just quickly. I've had conversations with people who are kind of apolitical, like don't pay a ton of attention, and they're like, "Well, what could he have done differently? I mean, what are you going to do? It's a pandemic." Like that's a regular thing for people that don't pay attention to politics.
Yeah, and then that crowd. That massive crowd of people jammed in there without masks, except the people directly behind Trump that are forced to. Like, think about if you're in that crowd and you look at Trump, and past Trump, you see that they have forced the people behind him to put on masks. What is all of that, all the signals that that's sending? The fact that they supposedly give masks to everyone in there, but don't actually ask them to put them on. All of this. Yeah, we are a failed state in so many ways. We are a broken people in so many ways, and a lot of the ways that we're broken are not new. They just haven't been as directly activated on a daily basis by, a president like Donald Trump. We do exactly what we would do if none of these things were true, but it's much, much harder to sustain. Yeah, and like I say a lot, I said something to this effect yesterday with Francesca. I'm gonna keep it real. There is a countdown on how long I can continue doing this, and the thing that makes it not tick faster is people like Emma being involved in this, because it's too much to do if you're alone, and when you're facing enemies on literally all sides and you're being stabbed in the back as you're being stabbed in the chest, you need to collect the right people. And so thank you, Emma, for making this slightly more tolerable.
Well, John, I feel the exact same way about you. So, but right, our mental health, we're killing it right now in this pandemic. Yeah. No, I just mean it. I know everyone's mental health is really struggling, but it is hard to consume the news on this frequency. And yeah, I feel you, John. I totally do.
Over the past few months, the CDC, basically any medical arm of the federal government, has increasingly, apparently, been brought under the more direct political control of the White House. And we have a great example of that over the past few days. So the CDC, for instance, had posted information on Friday stating that the COVID-19 can transmit over a distance beyond 6 feet, suggesting that indoor ventilation is key to protecting against a virus that has now killed nearly 200,000. We got to catch up for the last couple of days. It's now more than 200,000. That's how bad this is. Where the agency previously warned that the virus mostly spreads through large drops encountered at close range, on Friday it had said, quote, small particles such as those in aerosols were a common vector. That was what they had posted. It didn't last long, with Jay Butler, the CDC's deputy director for infectious disease, saying in a Friday update that it was posted in error. Quote, unfortunately, an early draft of a revision went up without any technical review. The edited webpage has removed all references to airborne spread, except for a disclaimer that recommendations based on this mode of transmission are under review, with Butler continuing to say, we are returning to the earlier version and revisiting that process. It was a failure of process at CDC. Okay, so I get that. Sometimes we had a technical problem at the beginning of the show yesterday. So it was a technical problem. Generally, though, medical position papers aren't written as a technical problem.
Yes.
Can it transmit more than 6 feet, or can't it? Because apparently you've written up a document stating that it can. It seems like maybe it was posted publicly as a technical error, but what went into the actual writing of it? What is the state of the spread of COVID-19, and why was it brought up and then immediately taken down? Is it accurate or is it not?
Well, that's the part of the problem that is so bad about the politicization of a crisis response to a pandemic that Trump has thoroughly infected. They have done studies now. If there were to be a vaccine that comes out before Election Day, over half the country, I believe, said that an overwhelming majority, if I'm remembering the numbers correctly, said that they would not feel comfortable taking it. Definitely a majority. And they've done studies further about a vaccine in general, and a lot of people have cited the politicization of the process as brought about by Trump, as rushing it and making it connected to Election Day, as having completely shaken their faith in the validity of a vaccine. And that's why his leadership in this pandemic, lack of leadership, is so dangerous, because things that should be normal government proceedings and vetting processes, like what the CDC normally does, they're all cast into doubt, and people don't believe what they're hearing from government agencies. It makes things really dangerous moving forward when you can't have government function on its most basic level in the middle of a crisis, because the president and the party, the Republican Party, has so shaken the faith in just very simple things.
100%. And that's the biggest issue. So I'm assuming at some point we'll understand what actually is going on in this area. I hope. Is it being held for a little bit longer before the election to justify Trump's continued rallies and his lack of advice, for states to comply with this, him continuing to advocate as he has been up until yesterday for schools to reopen? Are you sure that that's not what it is? Yeah, I don't know. And I mean, the fact that they cut back on testing, and we have this story about money for the military that was supposed to go towards that being taken away, and taking more centralized control over the reporting of these numbers. I don't know exactly how far the political control over the spread of scientific information has gone. And that's sort of the problem. I don't know that we can know. That's what makes me worried. The information we're getting is horrifying, but God only knows what they're hiding. And we'll see if anything's done about it. I mean, if we can skip ahead, Brian Schatz tweeted the CDC just published scientifically valid information, then pulled it off their website, and this is very likely a scandal. Okay, but is it? Or RBG died that day, so I guess we don't care about it anymore. The ICE detention hysterectomies, I guess we don't care. What does it take for a scandal to actually matter? All of these things would have been massive stories just a handful of years ago, but now it just seems like the solution to anything they're caught having done is to just do something terrible, and then 3 days later do something terrible again.
I don't really have anything to add to that, John, because
I know.
yeah, I mean, it's just we're just inundated with it. It's just we're up to our ears in it, and there's no way to see straight. I mean, regular people can't. We can't see straight in the goddamn news. Regular people can't see straight, and that makes it really terrifying. It means actions have zero consequences.
Yeah, not even the shallow surface consequences. When that story came out about the hysterectomies, that was news for a couple of days, which is miraculous in 2020 that a story can break through for a couple of days. And a lot of our elected officials said, that they were horrified by this. Did Republicans need to even pretend to be horrified? They have to even pretend for a day or two to care about that, or to imply that maybe an investigation is necessary? No.
No,
they can't put out that signal.
Pro-eugenics party. They're the pro-eugenics party, and that's fine in a modern day 2020 major political party in the richest country on earth.
Yeah. And because if they express empathy, they're based with what's that?
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just said we're dark today. You and me.
Yeah, well, don't worry. This next story is going to be a light one. No worries. Do we still have that Biden ad? Can we play that from yesterday? Anyway, yeah. Okay. Look, we're going to push through because we do have several more stories to get to. No, there's nothing really light today. Maybe a little bit, maybe one. Anyway, let's talk about Florida. Apologies to the director if I'm jumping ahead, but Ron DeSantis is pushing a series of laws to effectively criminalize peaceful protests and perhaps legalize murdering protesters. I know that saying that seems crazy, but you got to catch up to Republican politics in 2020. So he tweeted, "Today I announced bold legislation that creates new criminal offenses," always good to create new criminal offenses, "and increases penalties for those who target law enforcement and participate in violent or disorderly assemblies." Yes, because if they were peaceful, if they were orderly assemblies, he would be totally willing to engage with them and possibly change laws as a result. Anyway, forget the rest of his tweet. Let's take a look at the Combating Violence, Disorder, and Looting and Law Enforcement Protection Act, which it's got a nice Orwellian spin to it. So it's a bunch of stuff. All of those components are absolutely horrendous, but we're going to focus on a few. So it would make it a felony to, quote, obstruct traffic during an unpermitted protest. So it's a felony to obstruct traffic. Again, not violent, not rioting, not destroying cars. If you are in the road and it impedes someone for a moment, that could be a felony. Remember, in Florida, felonies can stop you from ever voting again. It also absolves motorists of liability for, quote, injury or death caused if fleeing for safety from a mob. Okay, Emma. I apologize. I'm not in a great mood.
Okay.
We have had months of these protests now. Has there been a single instance in which someone in a car had to flee for their life from a disorderly mob where this would have been justified? Has that happened one time?
Well, there have been cars involved in protests, usually mowing down protesters, because I don't know if you know this, but protests often try to make things a little inconvenient for people. Ron DeSantis, if he were a governor back during the civil rights era, he would think that all of the protesters on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, who I'm sure he now hails as civil rights icons to score political points when he would be on the opposite side of it during that time, all felons. Go to get a felony charge for your disorderly conduct. I mean, that's insane, because protests take place in streets. Sometimes they block traffic. I hate to break it to you.
Yeah. Look, I'm inclined, obviously, to agree with you, but it's very clear in the Constitution that you have all of these rights as long as it doesn't inconvenience anyone. If it inconveniences someone, not only is that not constitutionally protected, but you're a felon now. You're going to lose all access to your, any state level benefits. That's a part of this. Also, you won't be able to vote if you inconvenience anyone while exercising your rights.
Right.
That's what they're saying. And again, the reason I pointed out is no one has had to flee for their life. Nobody. It hasn't happened ever at all. Nobody's had to do that. But what has happened is both civilians and cops have run people down with their cars. We already know that this is a tactic that the right likes to use. They apparently picked it up from ISIS. They've used it to kill protesters in the past. And so now it's you're protected from liability for injury or death caused if fleeing for safety from a mob. Okay, so that makes it seem as if your life had to be in danger for you to be protected. But how do stand your ground laws work in Florida? How lenient are they on your ability to determine if your life is being risked? You know exactly how those work in Florida. If you kill someone, you will be protected. It doesn't matter what was happening, how peaceful it was, how many people were there. And that is the sort of thing that I could see sick right-wingers in Florida using. Okay, we already know there's a ton of right-wingers that want to run down protesters. That's the reason that these sorts of laws have been passed in multiple states. So now they know that they'll be protected if they do that. And all they have to do is say, I feared for my life.
Yeah.
That's not the only things. We're going to get to more, but Emma, continue.
No, and your point just about the losing voting rights if you're a felon. Wow. It's really easy now in Florida. They could just disenfranchise whole swaths of people with leftist political leanings if they show up and they are an inconvenience for traffic because they're protesting with Black Lives Matter. There you go. Cementing Republican power in Florida for ages to come.
Yeah. 100%. And so let's get into some of those more penalties. The proposed bill levies mandatory minimum prison sentences for striking law enforcement officers, including with projectiles, and contains an enhancement for throwing objects that strike officers or civilians, and for out-of-state protesters who even participate in a demonstration that turns violent. And again, it's not the protesters that get to evaluate whether it was violent or not. So if you're from out of state and you're in a crowd and someone else does something that they can spin as violent, you can be in legal trouble. And by the way, remember, all of these protests started as a result of people being infuriated by the decades-long police brutality, no justice, all of that. So what is the legislative outcome? Mandatory minimums if you do anything that hurts a cop. Nothing if the cops shoot you in the face with a rubber bullet, put out your eye. Is there anything about this? No, they're not even pretending for it to be balanced. The only result of protests against police brutality are protections for cops who brutalize people. That's what you get. And by the way, this is also these series of protests have given rise to this movement to defund the police. So that's in here too. There are provisions barring state grants to municipalities that defund police and terminate state benefits for anyone convicted of participating in a violent or disorderly assembly. So you can lose all of your state benefits if a protest that you were at is disorderly. And if any locality changes the level of funding to police, they can lose all state grants. So it's not up to, remember, like they're supposed to care about states' rights and all that. It's supposed to be about people actually being able to be involved in determining what happens in their area. No, if you ever lower the funding, that's it for your municipality, regardless of whether there's some sort of budget problem. No, everything else is up for grabs. You can lower that funding, but for the cops, it can only ever go up.
Yeah. Luckily, this is so clearly unconstitutional that it will be declared unconstitutional by what Mitt Romney calls our liberal Supreme Court.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so all these sorts of oh God, the Supreme Court is so important and people treat it as if it doesn't matter at all. God damn, what a stupid, stupid, stupid self-destructive political strategy. In not much longer, QAnon is going to be coming to the halls of Congress, but it's not waiting to get in before attacking politicians. Let's see, Marjorie Greene, noted QAnon supporter and congressional candidate that's definitely going to win, tweeted this. As a blonde woman, I would like to take a moment to thank Congresswoman AOC. She has single-handedly put an end to all dumb blonde jokes. Blondes everywhere appreciate your service and your sacrifice. And of course, because there's no standards for wit or humor or anything like that, it's got thousands of retweets already. Nobody knows what she's actually responding to. It seems like just a random tweet attacking AOC.
She got wine drunk and just felt jealous of AOC and decided to tweet something out.
I guess that's what it has to be. Yeah. But again, the right just wants you to like say Ilhan Omar's dumb, and they'll write an article on Breitbart about how you eviscerated her or something like that. So anyway, look, AOC responded saying, "Don't worry, Miss Green. I completely understand why you need to swing and miss on my intellect to make yourself feel better. You seem to have trouble spelling your own insults correctly. Next time, try single-handedly. It'll work better. Good luck writing legislation." And so, look, I don't care too much about the tweet up until that last point. Yes, it has typos, but she's an idiot, and her entire movement's an idiot. They don't care about that. But yeah, she is going to have to write legislation, as AOC has done a number of times. Despite the fact that she was just a bartender, she has shifted, public conversation on any number of issues more than anyone else in the past couple of years. But Marjorie Taylor Greene poses with guns and believes that a satanic cabal of child rapists is controlling every government around the world, and Trump needs to take it down. So doesn't AOC look dumb?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I also love the just a bartender line of attack. What happened? I thought you guys were all about people pulling themselves up by their bootstraps, and now you're going to attack her for having a regular job? Isn't that what you pretend your entire political ideology is all about? People working hard and then achieving what they can achieve? So stupid, and such an obvious way to demean her based on her ethnicity and her gender.
100%. Yeah, no, all of them can't wait to mock the fact that she's not an heiress or something like that. She's not part of a political dynasty. Right. She wasn't chosen by billionaire donors. She actually accomplished something. They can't wait to attack that because, as we point out many times, right-wing populism is a joke, and it actually has no substance. Anyway, yeah, look, I guess in the end, while they're joking back and forth, the joke is on us because a conspiracy theorist is going to be occupying a seat in Congress. Another Republican, by the way, this isn't a first, who, for instance, if we can bring up this picture, poses with assault rifles and photos of non-white representatives that they would love to gun down, and says that, she needs to take the fight to them and stuff like that. So I guess the joke is on us, because there's no standards whatsoever. I mean, she believes, again, in a satanic cabal of people who drink child hormones and rip their face off before having sex with each other. She actually believes that. And, okay, QAnon's a bit confusing. People don't necessarily understand it. There's hours of video of her in which she's expressed racist, Islamophobic, and anti-Semitic views. She says Muslims don't belong in U.S. government, but she's going to be in U.S. government. And Trump congratulated her because you're allowed to be openly anti-Semitic and Islamophobic, and that is not an impediment to the entire Republican Party giving you a big warm hug.
They pretend to care about anti-Semitism with Ilhan Omar and say she's an anti-Semite. It's hilarious. It's so depressing and messed up. I'm sure
Barry Weiss is attacking Green on a daily basis, every single day. Yes, I'm sure.
Great point.
Yeah, kind of doubt it. Okay, with that, let's move to one more story with the little time that we have left with Emma. Okay, give me 1 sec. Oh. I've been pacing myself. I have very little left. Okay.
Oh, you could have kept it up before. That's okay. So you remember when the U.S. government sort of briefly kind of did a little something to pretend that they cared about the pandemic, and they like gave regular people, some of them, like $1,000 6 months ago. Well, they also allocated a bunch of money to be handed off to corporations and also to the military. And they were nice enough, were they not merciful, to make at least a little bit of it kind of targeted at doing something about the pandemic rather than just an obvious blatant slush fund for corporations to take to just boost up their profits artificially. Of course, some of it turned out not to be used for the reason it was allocated for. And we have a new report coming out of the Washington Post with a $1 billion fund that Congress gave the Pentagon in March to build up the country's supplies of medical equipment has been mostly funneled to defense contractors and used to make things like jet engine parts, body armor, and dress uniforms. Isn't that fun? Okay, so let's talk about a few of these individual awards. $183 million to firms including Rolls-Royce and ArcelorMittal to maintain the shipbuilding industry. Tens of millions of dollars for satellite, drone, and space surveillance technology. $80 million to a Kansas aircraft parts business suffering from the Boeing 737 MAX grounding and the global slowdown in air traffic. And $2 million for domestic manufacturer of Army dress uniform fabric. Bear in mind, these sorts of, like, just handing money so that they can stay afloat while the lockdown was briefly happening, there's already funds for that. And many of these corporations already have benefited from that. They're just also taking the money that was supposed to go towards producing N95 masks, ventilators, and things like that, and they're just putting it into jet parts, basically. I understand.
No, they double dipped. They double dipped. They 100%. Took the money from, and they did They took the PPP loans. And they took this money and they still gave it to defense contractor buddies because Esper, who's the defense secretary, is literally a Raytheon lobbyist who now has that position. So now we're just open about the corruption. It's totally fine. And then they have the gall in the next stimulus bill to ask for $11 billion more. Where do we know that's going to go? Like, you were supposed to be creating masks and securing PPE, and you wanted to dress your soldiers up a little bit nicer and gave it to those industries. It's insane. Yeah.
Well, okay. Insane might be going a bit far. I mean, they do need to buy uniforms, and you have to understand, Emma, that the U.S. military is basically running on fumes in terms of its budget. I mean, its 2019 fiscal budget was only $686 billion. How could they afford uniforms with those nickels and dimes that we're giving them to defend the homeland? And look, this is where it gets even sadder, I guess, because despite the fact that our military budget is still about where it was at any given year during the Cold War or right after 2001, despite the fact that we have no active adversaries, we still need a budget as if we're going to take on the entire rest of the world and the moon. That budget was supported by any number of different Democrats. The funding going to them, the fact that there weren't stronger regulations to make sure that it was actually put into the industry as it's supposed to, a lot of Democrats support that. But Bernie Sanders is the bad guy for trying to cut the budget by just 10%.
Which is 10%. less than what it was when Trump entered office. Like, it would, or I'm sorry, the percentage is less. It would still be more than what it was at the start of 2017. But that they can't even do. Democrats can't even do. The vote was like 23-77 or something like that. Like half of Democrats wouldn't even support that bill.
Exactly. I mean, we're in the middle of a crisis. People are dying. And can we really do anything about it? I don't know, like enhanced unemployment. We don't have the money for it. We need to get new dress doilies for the F-35 or something. They can always find something to put that money into, either the Department of Defense or police departments locally. Those budgets they'll never even stabilize, let alone go down. But the American people, you're sort of on your own. I mean, is it really an economic crisis? Sure, tens of millions are out of work, but the stock market's kind of going back up. It's just the priorities are so clear, and people still just don't really care. And I get part of it is that the Dems aren't really that much better on this, either because they get donations from the same industries or because they they still believe after decades that if we just show that we support the military as much as the Republicans, we'll stop losing on that, as if Republican voters would ever switch over just because you give more funding to the Marines. I don't know what the reason is. It's not acceptable. And this, look, it's $1 billion. It's a significant amount of money, but it is just a drop in the bucket of how insane our entire strategy as a country is in terms of how we allocate funding to domestic priorities versus the military. For months now, we've shown you video in a number of different American cities of unmarked law enforcement officers just driving up in Kia minivans and other regular cars and hauling people off the streets. It's a horrifying image, but until now, I haven't actually spoken to anyone who had to go through that to understand what it must have been like. Well, now we have an individual, Jeremy Logan, co-chair of the Spokane DSA chapter. Welcome to the Damage Report.
Hi, thank you.
Very glad to have you on. So this happened to you. Tell me a little bit about how it developed, the protest that you were at, and what actually happened.
So we had organized a few protest demonstrations downtown, and been a part of others. At least played secondary roles in some of the other protests that had happened. And I was interviewed in an article in the Inlander where the sheriff had been blaming Antifa for the problems for some property damage and that sort of thing. And I went out afterwards and criticized the sheriff pretty heavily. And I think that's when I came onto his radar. But that morning, we're heading to a protest that afternoon, actually. And I texted my friend, told him exactly where I was gonna park. When I got there, there was a car parked in a parking lot and a guy walking kind of opposite of downtown, it was just weird. It was suspicious to me right away. And then all of a sudden, I hear my name called, and I turn around and there's two guys running directly at me from the opposite direction. And when I turned back around, the guy that I saw walking through the parking lot had come up on me. And then a guy that was dressed kind of like a homeless man jumped up and was alert all of a sudden. And I'm completely surrounded. The two guys that were coming at me, one looked like militia. He had a vest on, almost like a sheriff, but there was no sheriff symbol or anything, nothing like that. Mm-hmm. And so just to be clear, this wasn't like you've been at the protest for hours, things have been happening. This was like kind of like someone was waiting for you to show up in the area. Yes, it definitely felt. I mean, I was definitely targeted without a doubt. So I kept asking them what I was arrested for, and they said I was arrested, or I had a warrant in a county that I haven't been to in 20 years. And I knew I didn't have a warrant there. I did have a warrant for not paying fines. I got clean and sober almost 9 years ago now. The arrest was actually 9 years ago. The warrant's been there for 7 years. After I completed all of my DOC and all of that stuff, they hit me with fines that I couldn't pay. I was going to school, and I just started back up and getting an education and that sort of thing, trying to turn everything around. And they hit me with these fines and told me I had to pay like $250 a month or something, and I had like $300 a month to live on. I was living on my student loans because I knew I didn't have the capacity to go to school and work a full-time job. So so it was for not, it's like $2,300, I think, is what I owe in fines. They definitely spent more money picking me up off the street than I owe. Well, and just to be clear, generally, I don't think that police officers do stakeouts at protest locations to track down people who owe money in a different area for student loans. That, like, I get that that's their excuse, and some right wingers will hear that and think, oh, well, he did something wrong. But that doesn't read to me as anything other than an excuse, basically. Oh yeah, and I mean, plus, I mean, what? Somebody doesn't pay. Let's backtrack a little bit. This fine, I've been pulled over twice, once by even a sheriff's officer, a sheriff's deputy, and told that I had this warrant, but they didn't want to extradite me. The county that I owe the money to wasn't going to pay more money to extradite me than what I owed, because it is more expensive to extradite somebody than the fine. So if they caught me in that county, then I would, they'd take me in and make me pay, but they weren't going to come and get me. They weren't looking for me. Exactly. I mean, especially considering my original felony charge was for possession charge. There wasn't like I robbed somebody or did anything violent, So I have none of that on my adult record at all.
So one thing that I've wondered, as like I said, on the show, we've showed videos of people being hauled away like this. And to me as an outsider, it looks indistinguishable from a kidnapping. Like it looks like regular people kidnapping someone. You said that one of the individuals looked like a militia member, something like that. As it was happening, did you feel like, oh, this is the police taking me in? Were you wondering who this was? What were you experiencing?
I probably would have been freaking out a lot more if I hadn't heard about this happening in Portland. I figured it was DHS. The sheriff claims that it was his deputies, but it felt like it was Department of Homeland Security or something. I mean, they put me in a minivan. They were trying to figure out where to put me. And they said, put him in the van. And the other guy said, well, we can't. It's full of guns. Like they just had this van full of guns to go to a protest. Like, well, what are they doing? And so the whole thing was weird. And I kept asking them, who are you? Like, I don't know who you are. Who are you? And the one guy said, don't worry about it. And and then later when they transferred me to a city cop, I asked him, I was like, what is going on? Like, this isn't normal. You don't bring somebody in for not paying fines and go through all this effort without calling the other county and finding out if they even want to accept me, if they even want to pay to have me transferred. He said, well, we can pay too. He said, those other officers said Douglas County wants you. Or not Douglas County, he said Chelan County by that point. So they'd mentioned 2 different counties, none of which were the actual county that I had the warrant in. And so he said those officers said that Chelan County wants you. And I said, those were officers? And that's a key point, because that cop said that I asked him who those guys were, and he said, I don't know. Because he was like, I don't know their names or whatever. But I was very specific in asking him, what kind of officers are those? And he said, I don't know. And then I sat there in jail for 2 days knowing I'm not there because of a warrant. When I got there, everyone in intake seemed to know who I was. Like it was coordinated. Like it was obvious that they knew who I was.
So in regards to that, I mean, you mentioned that you had recently spoken out against the sheriff, but you're also involved with DSA. Do you think that might have played some role in this?
I'm involved with DSA. I'm a tenant organizer for Spokane Area Tenants United. I've been involved with a lot of organizing. We organized some of the protests and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it definitely, I mean, I'm a target because of my politics.
Yeah. And of course, leftists of different stripes aren't the only people at these protests, especially in northwestern states. There's a long history of right wingers and militia and Boogaloo Boys and all of that showing up. Mm-hmm. Has that happened at the protests that you've been at? And have you seen them being hauled away in vans full of guns?
No, I've seen them like joking around with the cops when there was a curfew and the cops were tear gassing and shooting us with rubber bullets. Mm-hmm. And the militiamen were standing there, also past curfew, not getting hit with anything.
Did these militia members have you seen them armed?
Oh yeah, they come fully geared. Most of the time, I don't see them during the protest. They're like on the outskirts somewhere. They're LARPing for now. They're trying to pretend that they're doing something and actually doing nothing except intimidating some people. And that's their point. I mean, they don't really care about the businesses or whatever, They're there because they're against the protest, or they want to feel important. They want to feel like security guards. There's just certain people that have that something in them that makes them want to feel like a hero. And so they're going to make themselves a hero when, they're doing the opposite.
So, I'd love to know what the current state of the protests are in that area now. And also, I mean, you mentioned the people who want to feel like security guards. Unfortunately, some people like Kyle Rittenhouse go in to do that and they end up killing people. Is there fear that there could be copycats at the protests that you go to?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody is worried about something like that taking place. I know that there's, leftists that want to be armed at protests too. I don't think it's necessary at this point for leftists to be armed at a protest. I don't think that anything good's going to come out of that at this point. But it's definitely worrisome anytime you have people with right-wing agendas and their guns and they're fully against what we stand for, which is the liberation of working people.
Yeah. Well, look, I certainly don't envy you having to go through that experience. It sounds terrible. It sounds terrifying to be dragged away and just have to, just go along with it, assuming that they're probably cops. Hopefully they're not just random people kidnapping you. But more power to you for everything that you've done. I really do appreciate the activism, staying in the streets like that.
Yeah, and I would like to say too, like, my basic fear is that that other people are going to, like militia type people, right-wing people, are going to show up at these protests and start kidnapping people, and people are going to willingly go with them because they think that they're police, because they can pick you up and put you in a van now and not identify themselves, and people are going to think that they're police officers.
I mean, I definitely share the same fear. Like I'd love to put a hypothetical to them. Like imagine you're a conservative, you're a Second Amendment activist, you're all about defending yourself. So you're walking on the street and 4 people in camo pick you up. How do you feel being put in a position where if you defend yourself, which is what you live to do, you might be killing a cop, but you have no way of knowing because they're never going to identify themselves to you. I don't understand how. Like I get that they don't care because they won't be put in that position. It's only leftists that get kidnapped in that way. But it's horrifying that all of these stories, your experience and others just like it, haven't really broken through to people. How horrifying this is, and to see it spread to so many cities. It's happening in New York and all that too. It's coast to coast at this point.
And when you hear about kidnapping, the first thing they always tell you to protect yourself is not to go to a second location. Don't let them take you to a second location. So if you are armed and you're a leftist at these protests, like somebody's going to start shooting the cops to protect themselves, and they're going to die because if there's one cop, there's 10 cops.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a horrible situation. It is incredibly irresponsible and dangerous for the police to be doing that. And I share your fear. I mean, it feels like we're just waiting for some right winger to use this situation that's been provided for them. So just another reason that all this is so dark, so unnecessary.
Absolutely.
Well, Jeremy, thank you again. Great having you on. Thank you for doing what you do.
All right, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Damage Report. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, John Adarola. I'll see you soon.